First, let's talk about this dust-up between Liz Truss and Keir Starmer. 020 7862 2222. Can we answer this question? Who has done the most damage to the British economy, if indeed damage has been done? Liz Truss has sent a cease and desist letter to Keir Starmer demanding that he stops claiming she crashed the economy. Lawyers acting on her behalf say the statement is false and defamatory, and they even suggest these claims are part of the reason she lost her seat in the general election. So she's now gone one step further and released a video.
I was blamed for the LDI crisis, which the Bank of England has subsequently admitted was their fault. Government gilt rates for both 10-year and 30-year are higher now than they were back in 2022. Yet at the time, I was smeared by the Labour Party and by members of my own party for having crashed the economy.
On the other side of this, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves and Prime Minister Keir Starmer have been accused of causing economic chaos themselves with the autumn budget and their very uncertain start and all that. And yesterday we hear that 10-year borrowing costs have risen to their highest levels since 2008, so even higher than they were under Truss. So we've got an interesting question for you here. If we have a look at our big screen. And the question is, who did the most damage? And we're obviously going to be impartial here, so we add the important rider if indeed damage was done by these two. So let's use an AI image. Let's put Truss on the left and Starmer on the right, facing off against each other, and we'll try and make a kind of comparison here. But let's put the light on Truss first, okay? Now, I should say, we're about to ask ChatGPT a question. To answer, it uses millions of sources from search engines. Answers can be inaccurate, so this is just to give us a flavour of what the internet says about this topic. All right, so we asked ChatGPT first about this Prime Minister, this very short-lived Prime Minister here. Can you quantify the economic damage done to the UK by the premiership of Liz Truss? Only takes about 5 seconds to give us quite a lengthy answer. So they say it's complex, first of all, and you need to look at different metrics. They say, look, the Resolution Foundation, an independent think tank, estimated that she cost us about 30 billion quid. 20 billion was from tax cuts, which she brought in very suddenly, and then 10 billion from increased borrowing costs. The September mini-budget then caused market turmoil, says ChatGPT. The pound's value dropped. The Bank of England had to intervene. And we then had increased mortgage costs. I'll come back to that in a second. And then they say long term, we can't be sure what the effects of the Truss government are. But as far as the increased mortgage costs, I looked this up myself. For 5 million people, they had to pay roughly an extra $1,200 a year because they were renewing. OK, spotlight now on Starmer. Here we go with the Prime Minister. This will be interesting. He's only been in office a short time. Can you quantify the economic damage done to the UK by Starmer's premiership the first 8 months? Go on, ChatGPT. Let's see what you say. Again, a couple of seconds while they think. Pretty quick, though, isn't it? Analysing involves analysing various indicators. So GDP growth, government borrowing, currency valuation, market confidence. Again, a sort of basket of different indicators that ChatGPT will take into account. So they list them. Growth. And growth was supposed to be what Labour were going to give us. And they point out we've experienced stagnation. Borrowing. This was yesterday's news. Government borrowing costs have gone up. Bond markets selling off. The pound has weakened. They put that in as well. And their market confidence is waning. And the conclusion here is, in one word, this word here, challenges. That the Labour government has challenges. That's probably quite a fair assessment of both Prime Ministers. As I say, it's up to you. So if you want to be cruel to the current administration, you say this is a deliberate policy, picking your purse, jobs tax, winter fuel payments cut, farm tax, VAT on private schools. But at least they can say, well, it's deliberate. This is our policy. Truss is a kind of raging accident in a way. Her premiership is stuff happened that she wasn't really aware she was doing. So there's the Truss car plunging into the UK economy. It may be that that's Truss' best defence. She says, look, I didn't mean to do it. That's always quite a good defence. I don't know where that leaves us, Annabel. It's interesting, isn't it? One of them was an accident and one of them was deliberate.
I think one of them was short-term and one of them was long-term. Now, when it comes to the debate over who was more damaging to the economy, Liz Truss or Keir Starmer, I think the advantage that Liz Truss has is that she was only in power for 49 days and the impact of the ill-fated mini-budget was very short-lived. They were able to bring in new management and Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt were able to steady the ship and stabilise things and reassure the markets. Whereas the problem that this Labour government have is that it's going to be a medium to longer term problem that we have with our economy, which won't be helped by the fact that their credibility is completely shot. You say that Liz Truss, was an accident, whereas with the Labour government, this is all deliberate. But let's not forget that before the general election, they said that there would be no tax increases beyond those set out in the Labour manifesto. Then they started talking about black holes, which the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies had already identified before the general election. Then just a couple of weeks ago, you have the Chancellor of the Exchequer very irresponsibly saying that there wouldn't be any further tax increases. Now, that was almost guaranteed to make the markets feel jittery, because what they want is somebody for whom fiscal prudence is the number one goal. And if she's saying that she isn't going to raise taxes, well, what's going to happen when various costs start to increase?
Maybe Truss isn't as damaging as Starmer because Truss was a shorter premiership. My goodness, Matt.
First of all, I just don't like this territory of politicians or former politicians, certainly not former prime ministers, threatening legal action to incumbent prime ministers. And we also saw Nigel Farage signalling that he might use legal action against Kemi Badenoch over that reform membership ticker recently. He's decided not to do that if he ever was seriously contemplating.
Right.
That is not a good thing because it can have a chilling effect on our politics and the free speech within our politics. Yeah. On the issue of whether Liz Truss crashed the economy, I don't think she did crash the economy, and I think Starmer knows that. I think he kept saying that before the election for political gain. What she did do was panic the markets to such an extent that the mini budget had to basically be reversed. Her Chancellor was forced to resign, and she then, after 49 days, herself resigned. So let's not pretend that what Liz Truss did wasn't disastrous. I don't agree, and I may be wrong about this, with this 5 million people having to pay higher mortgages as a consequence of what she did. I think interest rates were going up anyway. Okay. I think they spiked. I think perhaps 100,000 people were affected. I think about 100,000 people. I'm not sure about the 5 million figure. Okay. On the issue of Starmer, we talk endlessly about the struggles of our NHS, and so many viewers will have experienced that, and indeed social care. What Labour did with their budget, and you can say they've taxed the wrong people by taxing small businesses, and you can argue that it was or wasn't in the manifesto. What they did was they put a serious multi-billion-pound injection into our NHS up front, so that we can start to cut waiting lists and improve our experiences.
Okay, yeah, but that's not an economic thing. We're talking economics here.
Well,
who did the most damage to the economy?
The question is by taxing those businesses, are they stifling growth, which has, of course, been at the centre of what they plan to do? Yeah. There is an argument that it has had or will have that effect, but not in the longer run, we hope.
Okay.
How will it
After the break,
let's
pause. We've got to take a break. We'll come back to that. I promise, because we're going to take calls as well. So Truss versus Starmer, who has done the most damage, if indeed damage has been done? 0207 862 2222. Is there Michael in Dover? Truss or Starmer?
I don't see any advantage blaming anyone for the history. We're in the here and now, and the Labour Party during the election, the candidates were disingenuous to the public. They refused to answer pertinent questions and then sprung things that weren't really discussed on the public, such as the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, the national insurance contribution. Although it's the employers they've raised the contributions on, it's affecting employees because less will be employed.
And it may be affecting growth as well, you're right. Yeah, but I mean, it is a good comparison, isn't it? Because Liz Truss is trying to not sue Keir Starmer, but she's threatening legal action because he keeps saying she crashed the economy. Do you think she can say, no, that's not me, that's you?
Liz Truss has to take responsibility for what she did, as did Gordon Brown when he sold off the gold reserves many years ago. We can go back blaming all sorts of politicians. Liz Truss ought to take it on the chin. She's a politician, and this goes with the territory.
OK, Michael.
Just accept it.
Thank you. Janet in Gloucestershire, hi.
Hi, Jeremy.
Who was the one who did the most damage?
Oh, absolutely no doubt of that. Liz Truss. She was an absolute nightmare. I mean, the implications of what she did with her Chancellor was dreadful. I mean, as a personal thing, my daughter and son-in-law were just about to renew their mortgage because they'd had a fixed-rate mortgage for 5 years. What the implication of what that woman did was that their mortgage went up by, I think it was £150 a month for exactly the same amount of money.
Well, that's what we were saying earlier, that there's a whole group of people who had to renew during the 49-day Truss premiership, and it was a horror show for them. I'm sorry to hear about that. Yeah. And are they still on that rate now, or has it come back down again?
Fortunately, they only took a 2-year mortgage, and they've renewed it now, and they've got it at a much better rate and a lot less per month.
Okay.
So that in the end, and that's under a Labour government.
Thank you, Jan. I know Truss is on the right, and the Telegraph is on the right as well, Annabel. But do you think she's an embarrassment to the Tory party? Even this thing of, as Matt says, trying to take legal action because she's been insulted in politics?
Well, exactly. I mean, this is somebody who presumably would view herself as a free speech champion, but it seems to be one rule for everyone else and a different one for me. No, this is the cut and thrust of British politics, and both parties and all politicians are as bad as one another. If you think back to the 1980s, the Tories reflecting on the 70s under Labour, how bodies were piling up in the streets, and the hyperbole that we witnessed then. Unfortunately, this is a sideshow from the much more important issue of Labour's mishandling of the economy, and it's Labour whose feet we need to hold to the fire, and it's Labour who we need to hold to account for the mess that our current economy is in currently. We should really be focusing on that, and Liz Truss is a distraction.
As I say, I don't think politicians should be threatening each other with legal action, but what I do think is that ahead of elections, politicians should be much more upfront with us about what they expect or plan to do. Now, the £22 billion black hole, which we've heard about infinitely, you essentially dismiss. I think there's some truth to it. I think it's half a reality and half not a reality. But, well, in other words, it's probably not £22 billion unforeseeable, but some of it was unforeseeable. Okay? Yeah. But Labour were not upfront, I don't believe, with what they were going to do when they got to power ahead of the general election.
Parties never are. This is the new thing, happened in 2010 with the coalition. They go, we're all going to have a good government. And they say, oh, my goodness, we've seen the books. We can't believe it. It's worse than we thought. And that's the new way of doing business. And it turns out that the voters won't accept it anymore.
Well, it's a real problem with trust in politics.
Of course it is. Mark in Norwich, hi.
Morning. My argument is this blame game should stop happening. And as far as I am concerned, I go back to Thatcher. I also go back to the fact that the governments come in every time and say, we've got all this money we've got to pay back. Well, why the hell are they not sorting out the public services and putting people back into jobs that they lost due to the privatisation?
Well, but the answer is that you can't put more money into the NHS if you suddenly say we've got to pay our debts off. And debt interest are important.
Yes, if you had people into proper jobs and they weren't on 0-hour contracts, we would have money coming into the system.
All right, thank you, Mark. Sharon in Staffordshire, hi.
Oh, good morning, Jeremy and panel. Now, Jeremy,
yes.
I don't think any of them are any better than the other. Truss came in as Tory Prime Minister, she ruined the country. Now, Starmer's coming as Labour PM, and he's ruined the country. They both have ruined the country. Both of them.
Well, he hasn't ruined the country, Sharon. I mean, that is a really extreme statement. And I just want to say this, because I've criticised Labour, but what they were trying to do in the budget was fix the foundations and turn back the tide of 14 years of Conservative failure and underinvestment when interest rates are low. Did the Tories invest properly in our infrastructure, in our public services? No, they didn't. Labour is desperate to try to do that and play a slightly longer game so that we do get growth, but there is a risk, I think, in the short term.
But one thing I would just say,
poor old Sharon, is that a question? Because what do you want to say, Sharon?
No, Matt, they have ruined the country. Look at the state of our country. Look at it. I'm so embarrassed to say that I'm British, and I'm looking at leaving this country because of what they've done to my country.
They've only just come in, Sharon. I mean, they've really literally been... Well, not literally. They've been in 5 minutes, haven't they?
No, Matt, they've been in 6 months, and look at the state of it. If they're in for 5 years, Can you imagine what this country is going to be like?
Sharon, the waiting lists on the NHS have come down, haven't they? They've come down for the first. Yes, they have for the first time in 18 months. That's what we learned yesterday. They're still very high, but they have come down, and that's what we want to continue.
NHS is not any better. The NHS is worse than it's ever been.
All right, Sharon, thank you. I want to just, before we move to your final point from you, Annabel.
It's simply not true to say that the 14 years of Conservative government saw no investment in our public services. Public spending as a proportion of GDP has just gone up and up and up and up. No government has balanced the books in this country since 2001, and spending on the NHS increased from 2010 until 2024 in real terms by 2% on average every single year. Well, how much will be enough?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? But it wasn't enough. What we do know is it wasn't enough.
All right, thank you both, and thanks for your calls later.